In his matte black Mercedes AMG, parked outside a Scottsdale high-rise with a rooftop pool, and a concierge who knew his name, Victor Torres looked like a man who had arrived. Designer watch, tailored shirt, 12,000 people on Instagram who double-tapped every photo he posted. From the outside, there was nothing missing. But Victor had a habit. Every time he pulled into that garage, every time the elevator doors opened onto his floor, he did a fast, quiet calculation in his head. Not gratitude, math. How much was left? How much was owed? How many more months the numbers still worked? He'd been doing that calculation for 3 years. It was getting harder to finish it. Victor sits in the idling Mercedes in the underground garage. The engine ticks. He doesn't get out. He opens his banking app on his phone, stares at it, then locks the screen without looking at the balance. He grips the steering wheel with both hands, exhales, then straightens his collar in the rearview mirror, steps out and walks toward the elevator like a man who has nowhere to be but here. 6 months after their father's funeral, Victor had invited Raymond up to the apartment. He'd wanted his brother to see it, really see it. The city lights through the floor-to-ceiling glass, the closet that looked like a boutique, the garage. He'd watched Raymond's face when he opened the door to the Mercedes. Raymond hadn't said anything for a moment, just looked.
You financed it?
Raymond hadn't argued. He'd just done that thing he always did, gone quiet in a way that felt like a verdict. Then Raymond had mentioned the fourplex, near ASU, $200,000 down, $6,400 a month coming in, $1,800 clear after everything. Victor had laughed. He'd called it boring. He'd meant it, at the time. But standing at the window after Raymond left, looking at the city lights he paid $3,400 a month to look at, Victor had felt something he didn't have a name for yet. The math had seemed simple at first. The Mercedes was $1,400 a month. The apartment was $3,400. The credit cards. He'd started using them for things the inheritance hadn't quite covered. Dinners, a weekend in Vegas, a watch he'd told himself was an investment. Those were $600 minimum, though the balances weren't shrinking. His salary at the agency was good. Not great, but good. If he got the bonus he was expecting, he'd catch up. He was always catching up. The apartment raised rent 8% at the first renewal. He signed anyway. The Mercedes needed a service that cost $1,100. He put it on the card. His Instagram following hit 12,000. He posted a photo of the car. 47 comments. People asking what filter he used. Nobody asked how he was sleeping. The Thursday it happened, Victor was in a pitch meeting when his creative director got a phone call and left the room. He came back 15 minutes later with a face Victor had never seen on him before. Blank. Careful. The kind of face people wear when they're trying not to show you that the building is on fire. The agency's largest client, a regional auto group that had been with them for 9 years, had decided to move their account in-house. 40% of the agency's revenue. Gone. Victor found out at 4 p.m. By 5 p.m., the managing director had called an all hands. By 6 p.m., Victor knew there would be layoffs. He drove home in the Mercedes, and for the first time since he'd bought it, he was aware of the weight of the car. How much it costs to move. How much it costs to stop. The light turns green. He doesn't move immediately. The car behind him honks. He called Raymond that night. He'd had most of a bottle of whiskey, the good kind. The kind he'd bought because it photographed well on the kitchen counter. And he sat on the floor of his apartment with his back against the couch because sitting on the couch felt too normal for what was happening. He told Raymond everything. The layoff, the $34,000 on the cards, the Mercedes at $1,400 a month, the apartment at $3,400. The total. He'd finally done the full calculation, the one he'd been refusing to finish for months. $8,000 a month just to stay still, just to not fall. And he had maybe 2 months of savings. Maybe. Raymond listened without interrupting. When Victor finished, Raymond said he and Anna had a guest room. Victor could stay there while he got back on his feet. There was a silence. And then Victor said the thing that broke him more than any of the numbers.
I can't! What would people think?
He is not afraid of poverty. He is afraid of being seen as someone who failed. The audience, the 12,000 followers, the colleagues, the strangers, have become more real to him than his own life. He has been performing so long, he no longer knows who he is without the stage. He spent 2 weeks trying to find another way. He applied to agencies. He reached out to old contacts. He told himself the right job would come through before anything had to change. It didn't. The credit card companies weren't waiting. The apartment wasn't waiting. The Mercedes payment came out automatically on the 15th, and watching that $1,400 leave his account, watching it go to a car he was now too anxious to enjoy driving, was the thing that finally moved him. He called the dealership. They told him what the car was worth on the current market. He'd paid $85,000 for it. They offered him $62,000. He'd still owe the bank the difference. He did the math standing in the dealership parking lot, in the sun, in his best suit, because he'd worn his best suit to this meeting without thinking about why. The loss was $23,000. He signed the paperwork. Victor stands in the dealership parking lot after handing over the keys. He watches a lot attendant drive the matte black Mercedes around the side of the building and out of sight. He stands there for a moment, in the sun. Then he opens the Uber app on his phone. The car that arrives is a dented Camry with a pine tree air freshener. He gets in. He sits in the back seat with his hands in his lap, in his best suit, in a Camry, watching Scottsdale pass through the window. He called Raymond on a Sunday evening, sober this time. He'd moved out of the Scottsdale apartment and into a studio in a part of town he used to drive through without looking. He'd liquidated what was left of the inheritance to clear the credit cards. He'd done the accounting. Not the hopeful kind, not the kind where you round up and assume the bonus is coming. The real kind. 3 years ago, he'd walked out of an attorney's office with $267,000. His father's 40 years. His father's boots, worn down to nothing. His father's truck, driven until the frame rusted. All of it converted into savings, and then converted into a check, and then handed to Victor. And a story about how he used to live. He told Raymond all of this. Not drunk, not performing, just the facts, in the order they happened. When he finished, Raymond didn't say anything for a moment.
You spent your inheritance. I invested mine.
Not cruel, just true. And Victor sat in his studio apartment. No city view, no concierge, no rooftop pool. And felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. The specific, terrible relief of a man who has finally stopped pretending. He got a job, smaller agency, lower salary. He didn't post about it. He didn't post much at all anymore. The 12,000 followers were still there. He'd just stopped performing for them. And without the performance, he didn't know what to say. He started reading. Books Raymond had mentioned years ago that Victor had laughed off. He read them on the bus to work because he didn't have a car. He read them in the studio apartment with the lamp on because there was nothing else to do in the evenings. And he was finding that nothing else to do was not the same as nothing. It was quiet. He hadn't been quiet in 3 years. He'd been loud, with the car, the apartment, the dinners, the posts. He'd been so loud he couldn't hear himself think. Now he could hear himself think. He wasn't sure he liked everything he heard, but he was listening. Victor, on a city bus, reading a book with a cracked spine. He's read it before, recently, more than once. Around him, ordinary commuters. He's in a plain shirt, no watch. He looks out the window as the bus passes through Scottsdale, past the high-rise where he used to live. He looks at it, doesn't look away. Doesn't look away until the bus has passed it completely. Then he goes back to his book. 6 months later, they met for dinner. A place Raymond chose. Nothing fancy, a booth, a menu with prices that didn't require a second thought. Victor told Raymond about the duplex he'd found. Nothing in Scottsdale. A quiet street in Mesa, not far from where they'd grown up. He'd saved enough for a down payment, slowly, carefully, the way their father had saved everything. The rental income would cover most of the mortgage. He'd done the math a dozen times.
I know a good property inspector. I'll send you his number.
They walked out into the warm Phoenix evening. Victor didn't have a car to walk to. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Raymond clapped him on the shoulder, the same gesture Victor had made outside the attorney's office 3 years ago, when he'd told Raymond he was going to live. Victor thought about that, about what he'd meant by living, about what it had cost him to find out he'd been wrong about the definition. Raymond offers a ride. Victor shakes his head. Not from pride this time. Something different. He's going to take the bus. He wants to. They shake hands, then embrace briefly, the way men do when something real has passed between them. Victor walks toward the bus stop. He doesn't look back. He walks like a man who is going somewhere, not like a man who is being watched.